Okay, so for my project, I had to research which country was most responsible for World War One starting. So here's the prompt. Focusing on the diplomatic situation in June through August 1914, assess the responsibility of each of the countries involved in the coming of World War One. So this is my thesis. The Central Powers were most responsible for the coming of World War One due to the aggressive response they collectively took towards Serbia after Ferdinand's assassination. However, Russia was partially culpable for supporting Serbia, and France was partially responsible as well for supporting Russia. Britain was least culpable and reluctantly entered World War One. Okay, so first, I wanted to start off by giving some background on what Europe was like around this time that I'm researching, the summer of 1914. So the major powers were divided into two rival groups or camps, the Central Powers and the Triple Entente. So the Triple Powers were Germany and Austria-Hungary, and the Triple Entente consisted of Britain, France, and Russia. So if you attacked one of the countries in this group, then you attack them all basically. So any regional conflict could become a general European war. So that's what ends up happening with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that eventually leads to World War One starting. But I'll get to that later. So countries develop plans based on the understanding that if they attacked one country, then their rivals or their allies would immediately defend that country, and that they would have to immediately deal with that country's allies. So they knew that they had to be able to get their armies mobilized and moving quickly. So one example of this is the Schefflin Plan, and it was basically Germany's plan to go through Belgium, attack France, and before Russia had a chance to get its army together, Germany would then wanted to attack Russia. So they do eventually try to use this plan, but it fails. Okay, so the different allies systems led to the arms race because each country needed sufficient firepower and weaponry to keep up with the other European powers. And also, they needed weapons to defend their colonies and secure trade with their colonies. And so, because of this, they armed themselves as never before in peacetime, with military expenditures reaching 5 to 6% of their respective national incomes. So, they were trying to maintain the balance of power. And whenever one country moved ahead of the others economically or politically, militarily, its rivals would instantly try to work together to negate that advantage. So we talked about the balance of power that originated at the Congress of Vienna, and it depended on no single nation or nations being able to gain an unassailable lead. But this didn't really work out because Germany and Britain were clearly pulling ahead at the beginning of the 20th century. So Germany had a really strong military on land. They had a good industry, and they were really trying to extend their power throughout Europe. And then Britain, we had, already talked about this, but they had a lot of colonies, and they had a really strong navy, and they were the first country to experience the Industrial Revolution. So they were all these two countries, Germany and Britain, they were starting to pull ahead. And this made the other major powers feel kind of like desperate because they were trying to keep up with Britain and Germany. So we also talked about this. Corey, Carmen, and Megan Rose covered it, so I just want to touch on it. Basically, it created a lot of tension between the different powers, and it just contributed to the idea that the balance of power was over, and that if a country didn't extend its influence abroad, then they would sink into obscurity. So there's just a sense of paranoia and desperation throughout Europe. And the reason I wanted to include this was because I just wanted to explain why there was so much tension in Europe by the summer of 1914. So the arms race, the ally system, new imperialism, that's all contributing to this extreme tension in Europe. And that's why such a small event sparks an entire world war, is because there's so much tension in Europe at this time. also very prevalent during this time was nationalism, which we talked a lot about, and it drove arms race and new imperialism. And so basically, because of nationalism, um, the population was ready for war, and they really idealized war, and they thought that if war broke out, that their country would just win the war like really quickly, really decisively, that they would just get in and out of the war, no problems. And so they had like the citizens had this like complete and basically like irrational faith in their country and the might of their country, that they would be able to defeat whatever obstacles were thrown their way like easily. So there weren't that many, like there weren't a lot of people who hesitated at the mention of war. There were some peace movements, but the people who strove for peace, they were called like that they were not that like they didn't like their country, and that they didn't like they were enemies to their country. So mostly people um, didn't really have many qualms about starting a war. So there was also social Darwinism, which we talked about already. But basically, in the light of this, with my PowerPoint, I just want to talk about how it affected their view of war. So Darwinism stems from when Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species by the Means of Natural Selection in 1859. And so Herbert Spencer developed these ideas into social Darwinism. And so basically what they believed is that war is just nature's way of weeding out the human race. So they didn't like have any hesitations towards war. They they just thought like it was a natural part of how the world works. So that was just another thing that contributed to World War I starting, just the sense of the mood in Europe with nationalism and social Darwinism. And so I feel like this picture pretty accurately describes social Darwinism. And it just shows like there's the two babies, and that like there can only be one. Like one is the victor, one is supposed to be the stronger one, and that's the one that will win. Damn it. So close. Just